On Christmas morning, 1928, Emery and Ellsworth Kolb rounded a bend on the Colorado River in the Grand Canyon. They approached a boat known as a sweep scow that was eerily floating in a pool with the bow line snagged on something under the water. Emery realized the scow was the rain in the face. His friend, Glen Hyde, built the boat just a few weeks before, and Glen Hyde and his wife Bessie were now missing. Ellsworth turned on a camera and filmed as Emery approached the boat and reluctantly peered over the edge. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. In February 1927, Glen Hyde, a 28-year-old farmer from Idaho, saw the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Bessie Louise Haley Helmick, traveling from San Francisco to Los Angeles aboard the same ship as Glen. Glen was a charming and adventurous type, the kind of man that the well-to-do Bessie had never met. She was from Parkersburg, West Virginia. She went to art school in San Francisco, funded by her wealthy parents, and as fate would have it, she had recently left her abusive husband, only being married for 2 months. However, her husband, the abusive and controlling Helmick, wouldn't give Bessie the divorce. Regardless of her marital status, she was falling for Glen, who had swept her off of her feet on that short trip from San Francisco to Los Angeles. Their relationship moved quickly. After only a short time had passed, they decided to marry. Because Helmick wouldn't allow divorce, and women's ability to file for divorce was extremely limited, Glen and Bessie moved to Nevada, where the laws were more liberal. Bessie finalized her divorce from Helmick on April 9, 1928, and was married to Glen Hyde on April 10th. Glen immediately began planning their honeymoon, but their honeymoon would not be shipping off to an extravagant location for leisure activities. Glen Hyde's idea of a perfect honeymoon was traversing the Grand Canyon by the Colorado River while setting a new speed record, and in the process, Bessie would become the first woman to run the canyon. There was no commercial rafting at the time on the Colorado. In fact, only 45 people total had completed this trip. This was a dangerous journey that they needed to be well prepared for. Glen had started boating in Prince Rupert, British Columbia. There, when he was a child, his family would take canoe trips on the Skeene River. In 1919, at just 20 years old, Glen and a friend, Jess Nebeker, spent 6 months canoeing, fishing, and hunting along the Peace River in Canada. 3 years later, in Moscow, Idaho, Glen met a famous boatman by the name of Harry Galecki. Glen joined Harry on his wooden flat-bottom boat called a sweep scow. Glen spent the next few years in school, but he never forgot the stories from Harry. And when he got out of school, he built his own sweep scow. He began sailing at the Salmon River in Idaho, and he sailed all the way to the Pacific Ocean by way of the Snake and Columbia rivers. By the time Glen and Bessie set sail down the Colorado River, Glen was an expert. In 2 days, and with only $50, he made his own scow, which he named the Rain in the Face. Glen and Bessie were dead set on breaking the record for fastest to finish the voyage. He would go down in the history books, and she would become the first woman to complete the journey. This would bring plenty of fanfare and publicity to her poetry. She also kept a journal, which she planned to turn into a book when the trip was complete. On October 20th, 1928, the honeymoon couple set sail on the Green River in Utah, bound for Needles, California. They had everything they needed: food, water, oars, rope, tools, and even a mattress, but no life jacket. Even though Bessie urged Glen to bring them, he refused. The trip started off well. The couple navigated Labyrinth Canyon and met up with the Colorado River in Stillwater Canyon. They followed the Colorado through Cataract, White, and Glen Canyon, where Lake Powell now sits. Completion of the Glen Canyon Dam was September 13, 1963. Back then, it was smooth sailing down the Colorado through Marble Canyon into the Grand Canyon. When they reached the North Rim, according to Betty's journal, they were ahead of schedule, so they stopped at Bright Angel Creek to climb the South Kaibab Trail. They were more than halfway through their journey and in need of rest before the waters became more treacherous. Here, they met up with the famous boatman, Emery Kolb. Emery and his brother Ellsworth were experienced boatsmen and photographers. They had taken a 1,000-mile journey down the Colorado while recording their trip. This was the first motion picture of the Grand Canyon ever recorded. Bessie and Glen met up with Emery, who showed them around the rim and chatted about boating and what they should expect down the Colorado. Emery also noticed that they didn't have life jackets. Emery offered them his life jackets, but Glen refused. Emery pressed Glen, but Glen just laughed it off. When later asked about this, Emery stated that Bessie was very upset with this decision and was ready to quit the journey altogether. However, Glen persuaded her to continue. The next morning, the couple headed down the trail to the water's edge where the Rain in the Face was docked. There, they ran into Adolph Sutro, grandson of the ex-mayor of San Francisco of the same name. His grandson was an adventurer similar to Glen and asked the couple if he could accompany them on their journey for a few miles to Hermit Trail. Glen and Bessie agreed, and Sutro accompanied them for 8 miles. Sutro exited at Hermit Trail, not knowing that he would be the last to ever see Bessie and Glen alive. On November 9th, Bessie and Glen were scheduled to arrive in Needles, California, but they didn't. After a few days and no word, Roland Hyde, Glen's father, set out to look for his son and daughter-in-law. He enlisted native trekkers who knew the area to search around the rim and hired boaters to search up and down the river. He even got the Secretary of War, Dwight Davis, to approve an aerial search. On December 19th, the aerial search found a lone scow floating in the river at mile 237. The pilots reported that the boat was undisturbed and looked to be in good condition. This report renewed hope to find Glen and Bessie alive. Roland met up with Emery and Ellsworth and hatched a plan to get the floating scow. They knew of a wrecked boat at the mouth of Diamond Creek at mile 225, just 12 miles upstream of the lost scow. They traveled to Peach Spring and hiked down Peach Spring Wash. However, when they arrived, the boat was in worse shape than they had thought. It took them 3 days to salvage the boat and get it into working order. The next day, Christmas morning, Roland and the Cole brothers found Glen and Bessie's scow, Rain in the Face, floating alone in a pool just above mile marker 237. The boat appeared to be in good shape, with the bow line snagged on something underwater. Upon investigation, they found all of the couple's supplies in the boat, all of their food, water, clothing, and a gun. They knew now that the odds of Glen and Bessie still being alive were slim to none. They also found Bessie's journal. Maybe this would provide clues as to what happened. With their boat found to be in order with all of their belongings, the only conclusion they could come to is that Bessie and Glen did not exit the boat voluntarily. The Cole brothers cut the scow loose and actually rowed the boat down the river. They noted that it was extremely dangerous and unstable for the rapids of the Colorado. Emery Kolb was later criticized by investigators for cutting the boat loose. Roland returned to Idaho without his son, but with documentation of his last days, Bessie's diary. Her diary revealed that they had made it to at least mile 231. There was also evidence that they had camped at mile 226 at the Diamond River. Initially, people believed that Bessie's abusive husband murdered them. However, Helmick had an alibi and was removed as a suspect. Though questioned many times, Helmick refused to speak of Bessie throughout the rest of his life. Historian Otis R. Marston noted that at mile marker 232, just after Bessie made her final entry, the couple would have met some heavy rapids with submerged rocks. Given the instability of their boat and the fact that they were not wearing life jackets, they could have been tossed from their raft without the raft being overturned and been swept down the river and drowned. This was a widely accepted outcome until 1971. By 1971, commercial rafting through the Grand Canyon had become extremely popular. The story of the missing honeymoon couple was also well known throughout the region. An elderly woman named Elizabeth Cutler on one of these commercial rafting trips told a very familiar story of when she was younger. Elizabeth Cutler and her husband were on their honeymoon rafting down the Colorado when her husband became abusive. She stabbed him, dumped his body in the river, and trekked out of the canyon on her own and changed her name. She claimed to be Bessie Hyde. This story received much more coverage than the woman expected. The rafters that heard her story went to the media. Upon questioning by reporters, the woman claimed to have never told this story and submitted that she was, in fact, not Bessie Hyde. Just 5 years later, in 1976, Emery Kolb passed. After his death, his family was clearing out his garage when they came across a skeleton with a bullet hole in the skull. The skeleton was determined to be a man in his late 20s and approximately the same height as Glen Hyde. Rumors and theories ran rampant for the next 30 years until 2008, when a forensic analysis of the body revealed that the bones were not those of Glen Hyde. Furthermore, it was uncovered that Emery Kolb had served as a county coroner jury representative. The skull was most likely from a case that he had worked on. However, no one knows why he kept the skull in his garage. The final curious event surrounding the disappearance of Bessie and Glen Hyde comes from 1992, when legendary Grand Canyon guide Georgia Clark passed away. Upon clearing of her personal effects, peculiar documents were found: a gun similar to the one carried by Bessie and Glen's marriage certificate, and a birth certificate showing that Georgia Clark's real name was in fact Bessie DeRoss. Georgia Clark was a Grand Canyon guide who was very interested in the case of the missing honeymoon couple. Though it was very strange that she had Bessie and Glen's marriage certificate, her life was well documented. She couldn't have been Bessie Hyde, and her birth name being Bessie DeRoss was just a coincidence. The case of the missing honeymoon couple has since run cold. Currently, the best theory is that the couple were swept overboard, drowned, and their bodies were swept away. However, with no bodies and no evidence, rumors surrounding their disappearance will persist. This is True Mysteries. Please like, leave comments, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.